And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. You're watching us on the Fight Now television channel. And if you don't have the Fight Now channel on your sports channel lineup, you need to call your local television provider and tell them that you want Fight Now right now. It's that simple. Pick up the phone and call. For all the information about the channel, you can find it on their website, www.fightnow.com. And speaking of now, joining us for another episode of his Heavyweight Spotlight, Tony Triem. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Bill. How are you?
I've been a little better. To be honest with you.
I hear you, man.
But anyway, we got an interesting email, and it was from Cesar Soto, and he said, BC, I really enjoyed a lot and learned about Primo Carnera thanks to Tony Triem and you. I just finished reading In the Ring with Bob Fitzsimmons by Adam Pollock. He ran 10 miles, he wrestled, he played handball, etc. as part of his training. Wow, could you guys do a segment on Bob? When I read this, I knew from, previous conversations that you and I had that, you're a big fan of Bob Fitzsimmons. As a matter of fact, you think he's one of the top pound-for-pound fighters of all time. Tell us about this guy, man.
I do think that Bob is one of the pound-for-pound. I'm not going to say he is the pound-for-pound greatest fighter that ever stepped between the ropes, but I feel he is one of the top. And before I go into that, and I know we're supposed to be talking about Bob Fitzsimmons, Ruby Red, Speckled Bob was his nickname. But to list a pound-for-pound fighter is very susceptible. And it's a matter of opinions. And in your opinion, who's the best, one of the best pound fighters that ever fought?
Well, I would say Sugar Ray Robinson is one of the best pound for pound fighters. At least that's who I have ranked number one.
And a lot of people would say that, and a lot would agree with you. But when you say that, are you talking about his middleweight career or his welterweight career? I feel he's a better welterweight than he was a middleweight. Most people give him the credit as a middleweight because he won the middleweight title 5 times, but he had to lose it 4 times in order to do that. But another man that was a great fighter in his day, and that was Henry Armstrong, who held 3 world titles simultaneously in his career, and that was featherweight, welterweight, and lightweight. And they don't even. Most times they don't even consider him, let alone Bob Fitzsimmons. They can't even remember him, and he was the 2nd heavyweight champion of the world under the Queensberry rule.
Right, and it's funny because over time, ever since they invented the pound for pound ranking, I mean, it wasn't even being discussed in Bob Fitzsimmons' days. I look at it this way, and this is the best way as I can describe it, and I think it might fall into what you're trying to get across with Bob Fitzsimmons. I look at a fighter, and I look at all of that fighter's attributes, his skill set, and I say to myself, okay, if he can retain that skill set, if he's the same fighter, he's got the same hand speed and punching power and what have you, defensive skill, and you changed his weight class. So in other words, in this case, if it was a heavyweight and you give him the same skill set and you lower him to a middleweight or a lightweight or something, would he still be as good? And that's where I get the pound for pound. So my question to you is, yes, Bob Fitzsimmons, he was a middleweight champion, a light heavyweight champion, and a heavyweight champion. So if we took Bob Fitzsimmons' skill set where he demonstrated in those 3 weight classes, and let's say he was a lightweight. Let's say we put him in a lightweight. We give him the tall, lanky body. We give him, his punching power. Would he have been just as dominating in the lightweight division, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely, he would. Bob Fitzsimmons was he was a physical freak, as they called him, but he was a fistic phenomenon. They also called him that. He never weighed more than 160 pounds. Some sources say, other sources say he never weighed over 170 pounds. But in most of his fights, he gave away 15 to 30 pounds to his opponent. He fought, like you mentioned, in 3 different weight classes, and he became the world champion in all 3 of those weight classes. So, yeah, I would think that Fitzsimmons could fight in any weight class of his day and be successful and be a champion.
Now he brought some stuff to the prize fighting arena, so to speak. Now, is he one of the first guys to really utilize the body punch?
Well, today on your show you was talking about the bolo punch. I kind of got tickled at it because it brought, and I didn't even think about this until you was talking about the bolo punch. Fitzsimmons, they give him credit for inventing the solo punch. That would knock the wind out of you, and of course would stop a fight. He would win by that way. But yes, he was one hell of a body puncher.
And he could take a beating too, didn't he? I mean, he was in some downright wars throughout his career.
They say that Bob was the most dangerous when he was hurt, and he would recoup faster than anybody that they've ever seen from taking punishment in the ring, which was phenomenal to me with Bob Fitzsimmons.
Now he did very well in the middleweight division. He beat some some well-known guys. As a matter of fact, one of my early favorite fighters that he actually took the title from, non-parallel Jack Dempsey, the guy who Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight Jack Dempsey followed his name. As a matter of fact, the only loss that Dempsey had was against Fitzsimmons, and he pretty much cleaned up those divisions, the middleweight and light heavyweight division, before moving to the heavyweight division. But it was a little different then. They would jump back and forth. It wasn't like, today where somebody says, okay, I'm a middleweight and then I can't make weight anymore. Now I'm a super middleweight. I can't make weight anymore. Now I'm a light heavyweight. Bob kind of jumped back and forth throughout his career, didn't he?
Yeah, very much so. And that's why I kind of look at the pound for pound today as being very hypothesized. It don't make a lot of sense today. Where Fitzsimmons, he would fight you regardless of what your weight was. He didn't care. If you was a middleweight, he'd fight you as a middleweight. If you was a heavyweight, he'd fight you as a heavyweight. If you was a light heavyweight, he'd fight you as a light heavyweight. If you was a welterweight, he'd fight you as a welterweight. He didn't fight welterweight. I'm just using that as an example. He was a man that feared no one. For his odd size, his odd body shape and torso, they laughed at him because of his body being so oddly built. He had real skinny legs. He had a real big broad chest. He had real big broad shoulders. He had real strong back muscle. He had real tough, strong arms, and that's all credited to him, to his profession. He was a blacksmith, so but nobody laughed at him when he got in the ring. He'd take you out in a minute. You could only make one mistake with Fitzsimmons, and the fight was over. James J. Jeffries tickled me. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bill. I know you were going to say something, but James J. Jeffries made a comment about Fitz that I thought was fitting, and it kind of puts him in a pound for pound rating. One of the toughest men that ever got in the ring with, and his hard twisting punches ripped one of his ears half off. He didn't pull a Mike Tyson. He didn't bite it off. It was due to punches that he threw and that twist that he had in that wrist when he popped you, almost tore one of Jeffrey's ears off.
Well, he fought Jeffries twice, and both of them were hell of a fights. The first one, obviously, for the title, and he lost via an 11th round knockout. Then his road back to Jeffries, who, many believed was unbeatable. I mean, the accounts of James Jeffries, really all the way until he fought Jack Johnson, was nobody can beat him, and he got bored with the division and ultimately retired before fighting Jack Johnson. But Bob Fitzsimmons, and this is the part that amazes me the most about him, that was actually in the tail end of his career, and he would go on to fight another 10 years after that, and he had already beaten all these great middleweights and light heavyweights. Tell us a little about the two fights with Jeffries.
With Jeffries?
Yes, sir.
Well, what they say about his fight with Jeffries is Jeffrey was battered something awful. His eyes were swollen almost completely shut. Fitzsimmons broke his hand on Jeffrey's granite jaw. uh, Jeffrey was bleeding from the mouth and everywhere. He was, every time that Fitzsimmons hit him, it just tore his face half apart. I don't mean ripping off. I don't mean it that way, but I don't know how else to say it. It just smashed his face and just disfigured it on every blow he threw, and he was just devastating in that fight. And those guys fought a phenomenal prize fight.
Yeah, and then after after the first fight, when he lost the title and Jeffries won, he comes back, and his road to another fight with Jeffries wasn't an easy one, because among those guys, he fought Big Gus Ruhlin, which was a big guy, and Tom Sharkey, and actually Tom Sharkey was trying to get his own rematch with Jeffries, and this fight was very important, the Fitzsimmons and Sharkey fight, and, it was really like what we call today, a crossroads fight. And ironically enough, they both would, go on to, get their shots. But at first, it was Bob Fitzsimmons who beat Tom Sharkey and then ultimately got his second shot with Jeffries. How was that fight? The second fight with Jeffries?
The second fight with Jeffries was just as brutal as the first fight. Of course, Jeffrey was victorious and won, but it was just those two men just battled each other, beat each other half to death. And one of the things that Jeffrey said after the first, and he also said it after the second fight from sources I've read, is you cannot make one mistake if you're fighting Bob Fitzsimmons. The one mistake you make will be the end of the fight. He will knock you out.
Well, I read accounts of the fights with Fitzsimmons and Jeffries, and after the second Jeffries fight, once again, the basic consensus with all the boxing scribes and all the fancy, if you will, as they were still being referred to, the boxing fans, for everyone that doesn't know what that was. Again, they wrote off Bob Fitzsimmons, and Bob Fitzsimmons was no spring chicken in after that fight, which took place in 1902, the second Jeffries fight. But once again, this guy is got more lives than a cat, because he comes back and fights his way back into contention again, and then he had two pretty entertaining fights with Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. Why don't you tell us about those two?
Jack O'Brien and Fitzsimmons. Fitzsimmons was near the end of his career. O'Brien thought he had Fitz's number, and he could go in there and just brutally take him by pure strength, and that's a mistake. Anybody would think that over Bob Fitzsimmons was a foolish prize fighter. Nobody's going to go there and just brutally take him by strength, even as an old man. And in Philadelphia, Jack O'Brien made that mistake, and of course Bob showed it differently.
Yeah, well, the first fight, Bob takes care of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, and they immediately fought each other again about 6 months later. And this was a fight that, I didn't quite understand, because I thought that Bob Fitzsimmons was pretty much leading that fight. He was winning that fight for the most part, because Jack O'Brien was a good boxer, and Fitzsimmons was pretty much in front. But then he ended up not being able to continue. What was the circumstances behind that? It's listed as a 13th round TKO, or unable to continue. What took place that disabled Fitz so that he couldn't continue that fight and ultimately got the L?
I'm really not sure, Bill, on that. I to be honest with you, I think he just was an old man and just ran out of gas, is my speculation on that, but I'm not sure of that, to be honest. Maybe you know more about that than I do. Well, I really don't know.
It's funny, because we've said it already 3 times, how people have said that his career was over, he's an old man, and after that fight in 1905, he would fight 9 more years. 9 more years, and one of those guys was Jack Johnson, and Jack Johnson, as you know, and I know he's one of your favorites too. He's one of my favorite fighters, and I recently read a comparison about him that kind of bummed me out, because as much as I love him, they were comparing him to a guy I am not too much in love with, and that's Floyd Mayweather of the times, and how people say, this guy was boring, he couldn't fight, he couldn't do this, he couldn't do that, but yet in that era, he was a guy that, was considered very defensive, took the easy way out. He would outbox a guy and rather than go toe-to-toe, and that seems a lot like Floyd Mayweather right now. But at that time when he fought Fitzsimmons clearly was old. It was in 1907. And he didn't last too long. And as a matter of fact, although his career did last 7 more years, there was a huge span between 1909 and then when he fought K.O. Sweeney in 1914.
Yeah, but Jack Johnson rated Fitzsimmons better than Jim Jeffries or Sam Langford.
Jack Johnson said that?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. In Fitz's old age, when he fought Johnson still rated him better than Jeffries or Langford as being a better fighter at that age. And that's pretty phenomenal, especially coming from Jack Johnson.
Now, he was pretty successful dollars-wise compared to that era, wasn't he? Or am I wrong on that? Did he make a good living from prize fighting?
Very good. I can't give you a dollar amount, but on accounts I've read on him, yes, he was very successful in the prize ring and became very not a rich man, but a very very well-to-do man. And he saved his money. I mean, he didn't die broke. His children and his wife did okay after he passed away. He was married and he had 3 children that I know of. He may have fathered more, but I don't know of that. His son, Bob Fitzsimmons Jr., I don't really know what he did in life. Or I've never found out. But his 2 daughters competed in swimming in the 40s and 50s. They were really big into swimming and was very successful in their competition.
Huh, that I never knew at all. One thing about Bob Fitzsimmons, and you and I were talking about this the other day, his wife was involved with his fights, used to yell at the opponents and yell at Bob, to step it up and stuff like that. And one of the things you and I were talking about was that was very odd back in the early 1900s and the late 1800s to have women ringside. I know we didn't really get to the bottom of it when we were chatting the other day, but why was it? I mean, it was just a man's place, or what?
Well, back then, yeah, it was really strictly for men. But Bill, to allude to what you're saying about his wife, I didn't know that until you told me that about his wife yelling into the ring and taunting the opponents like she did. I was unaware of that until you mentioned that to me, and I found that kind of interesting because I didn't know she attended any of his fights, to be honest.
Yeah, no, she was bad. There was fighters that I read accounts where fighters would be, part of the negotiation was they tried to get her not to be there. I mean, she was bad. I mean, it had to make me laugh because she was way ahead of her time. But, I don't know, and ironically enough, it ties into your photo showcase this week that we have up on BillyCBoxing.com, where you put some tombstones and grave sites of some former great fighters, and one of them is Bob Fitzsimmons. I don't know anything about his death. He seemed to have died young at 54 years old. How did he die? What do you know that? I just lost you, Tony.
I'm not real sure on how he died, Billy. But I've read accounts where he had a massive heart attack and that took his life. But I'm not sure of that. I don't take that as the gospel because I'm not sure.
Well, I just was wondering because some of the accounts go on to say how he went, he toured the vaudeville scene, then he became an evangelist, and all of these things, and it gave the illusion that he lived this ripe old, lived to a ripe old age, and he really didn't. He died pretty young. But anyway, in a nutshell, how would you describe his style for somebody? Obviously, in today's boxing fan likes to look at video and stuff like that, and obviously there's not much video on Fitzsimmons. How would you describe his style? If somebody said, hey, Tony, how did this guy fight back in the early 1900s? What would you say?
Well, different accounts say different things about Fitz. And I can only go by things I've read and this is the conclusion I came to. When he was in the crouch position, He was kind of slow and awkward, and they kind of described me as moving like a real slow gorilla. But he would spring up real quick and be real tall and throw punches and would take you by surprise. He had good footwork. He could box, but he was strictly a slugger, and his punches were just devastating. They were just powerful. And I was describing more of a slugger than I would a boxer. Although he could box, he had good footwork, and he would fight in crouch positions, but would spring forward and just tear your head off.
Yeah, he had freakish power for a guy that was giving up 30, 40, 50 pounds to his opponents. And another thing he did is he had his defensive skill was good. Not so much blocking punches, but he used his head and upper body movement well, didn't he?
Very well. He was very good. He had good head movement, and he used his shoulders and arms, and he moved well. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, some accounts that I had seen is that people couldn't believe some of the movement that his body from his waist up would be able to do, and it was almost like he shouldn't have been able to do it. Aside from his weird look that he had physically, and his build, like John L. Sullivan referred to him as a boxer on stilts, and he had this freakish power. I mean, he was quite the character, wasn't he?
He was good-natured. Yeah, he was a character, but he was really, really good-natured. He liked to joke. He liked to play around, but when he got in the ring, he was vicious, and he had a killer instinct. He had the it that you talk about a lot on your show.
The it factor.
Fitzsimmons had the it. He was it in the ring.
It's funny, too. I saw an account once. There was a stretch, a couple of fights where, they insisted upon gloving up and taping up in front of each other because there was rumors that they would soak basically plaster of Paris and then put it into gloves, and some people thought that that's why he had the power, and towards really when he was campaigning at heavyweight, he would glove up in front of each other and then still possess the power. So a lot of that was all BS, I would think.
Oh, Fitzsimmons, to my knowledge, never did anything illegal in the ring. To my knowledge, I'm not saying he did, he didn't, but to my knowledge, he never did anything illegal in the ring. Every win that he had was strictly by his brute power and his boxing skills, and that's why I rate him so high. He was a fighter that fought for 34 years. He had a record of 98 fights and 66 wins and a total of knockouts of 59 fights, and that's pretty hard to beat, Bill.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, and this guy was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. I know he was in the World Boxing Hall of Fame, too. When did he get inducted in there?
In 1987, way before International ever recognized him.
And the International Boxing Hall of Fame they have a slightly different record. The BoxRec shows exactly what you said, that he had a career record of 66 wins, 59 by knockout, 8 losses, 7 in which he was stopped, 5 draws, and 2 newspaper decisions. The International Boxing Hall of Fame has his record as 74 wins, 67 coming by knockout, the same amount of losses, less draws, but they also put in the 30 no decisions, so they had slightly more fights. Nonetheless, he had 406 rounds as a pro with a 60% knockout ratio. He was a kind of, yes, he was tall and lanky looking, but he wasn't 6 foot. He was 5'11" and a half. And incidentally, his last fight, he was 51 years old when he had a 6-round exhibition fight against Jersey Below. So this guy fought all the way up until 1914, and then he passed away in October of 1917. At the age of 54. Any final thoughts on Bob Fitzsimmons?
Yeah, I'd like to make a correction I made. I when we were talking about him dying, I said he died of a heart attack. I just looking at the notes. He actually died of pneumonia. He did not die of a heart attack. I was wrong. I'm just reading a note here. Fitzsimmons died of pneumonia. So I'd like to correct that. I gave some bad information out there, and I apologize to the listeners for that.
It's okay, Tony. Don't beat yourself up. Don't pull a Fitz on yourself. You know, I mean, don't start hitting yourself in the solar plexus. You know, but you know, we take it for.
No, I want to give good information. I don't want to tell the listeners wrong. You
know, we take it for granted the world in which we live. You know, crazy little things like, and I'm not saying pneumonia's not serious, but something that a guy that was such a badass in the ring ends up succumbing to pneumonia, and the same thing with some other great fighters. You know, they go in to get a tooth removed. Next thing you know, they're dying of an infection or tuberculosis or something. I mean, you know, at least this world has progressed in some positive ways when you think about it.
Thank goodness for that, huh?
Yeah. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Tony, great job as usual with the heavyweight spotlight. And you know, the other day when I was on the show, I broke it to everybody that you and I are going to be starting another show. Basically, Billy C. and Tony Triem's roundtable. I'm really looking forward to that, my man. I did not divulge some of the things you and I have discussed, but that's going to be some fun, I think. What do you think, real quick?
I think that is going to be a great show, and I think the listeners are really going to enjoy it for what we got in mind to do. And when we get to that round table going, I think it's going to be phenomenal. I think it's going to be great. Well,
I think we should do some kind of a pilot in the very near future, like maybe in a week or so, if you're up to it. What do you think?
Let's do it. Absolutely, let's do it. And hopefully a listener will give us another heavyweight spotlight to do. If not, we'll pick one and we'll do it anyway.
There's plenty of great heavyweights, my man, plenty of great heavyweights. But just like Tony says, hey, if you're interested in wanting to learn a little more about a specific heavyweight, feel free to drop me an email, Billy@talkinboxing, TalkinBoxing.com. And Tony and I will surely discuss it on our next heavyweight spotlight. Tony, it was great as usual, and I look forward to the next time, my friend.
As I do, Billy, and I hope that I didn't catch the listener's name that requested us to do Fitz, but I hope we answered these questions and hope we was able to enlighten him on one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters that ever stepped into the ring. Yep. Ruby Red, Speckled Bob Fitzsimmons.
That's right. His name was Cesar Soto, was the guy who requested it, and I appreciate it. Great job with that, and I look forward to the next one.
Thanks, champ.
All right, take care, Tony. That's Tony. He's using my line. That's Tony Triem, giving us another heavyweight spotlight, and as usual, does a great job there. And just a reminder, you can check out BillyCBoxing.com and catch all the replays of the heavyweight spotlight. Tony Triem has a section there that you can check out, and make sure you look for our new show. Tony and myself are going to be doing a roundtable, and we're going to give you a little tease about that in a couple of weeks. So check that one out. And, hey, until next time, we'll see you in a little bit. I got to take a break. We'll be right back.